Right, in this video, we're going to take what we did in the last video and review and then add some more tools to our toolkit here. The idea here in this video is we've got these three columns, therefore, that are showing up side by side utilizing flex boxes. These have some nice margins in between the three columns, which makes that a little bit cleaner, a little bit more, professional looking. If I make this window smaller, the viewport smaller, then we see those little margins disappear and now they'll line up on top of each other. So this video will demonstrate how we can accomplish all of that. So I'm going to close this out, and of course I got W3 Schools open. We are going to start with this particular set of code that's already set up for us, and what we've got here is three rows or three divs. So I have three divs. There's one div, which is this top column. It says pink, but it's really blue. My colors are off, aren't they? So this is actually the blue, and then the second column is the green, and then the third one is purple. So maybe not good with the colors, but hopefully good with flex boxes. So now if I refresh that, there we go. That looks a little bit better. Meanwhile, notice that each of these divs have the same class name. All three of those have the name columns. And then our parent div then is this columns container is the name of that class. Remember, those are all user defined. You can call yours whatever you want. All right, so the first thing that we need to do in order to set these into columns, remember, is take the parent container, which is columns container, and we're just going to give it display flex. And so then by default, it's going to say, well, all of my children, which in this case are all columns, class names columns, should appear by default side by side. That's the default, side by side, and take up an equal amount of space, which we can see is happening. All right, so the next thing that I want to try is we're going to do something called, we're going to go into this class container. We'll do this first. So we'll go to W3 Schools, and let's do a search on flex boxes and see what we come up with. Did you mean flex box? Yes, I did. So this gives you a nice overview, a nice tutorial of things that we'll be talking about. I would encourage you to look it over if you need some more. Sometimes it's nice to see it in a different way than the way I'm presenting it, or somebody else might explain it. But it's the same concept. It's trying to explain that you've got a parent element, and that's your container, and then you've got some divs set up within the parent. And as long as you give the parent container this display flex, then by default things are going to show up by columns, and you can change that default, but we're getting to all of that. Here's some other properties that you can assign to that container, the parent. And if you click on one of these, like I'm going to be demonstrating the align items next, we're going to bring you, takes you to a different spot on this particular page. In other words, you can see flex direction will bring you to this part of the page. If you click on alignment items, further down the page is a little quick example of align items, which works, but I would like to be a little bit more clear on some of my options. So I'm going to click on the search and search for align items. Maybe I should spell it right, items, there we go. And then go ahead and click on that property. And then if you scroll down, of course, here's more descriptive information about the align items, and I would encourage you to look through this. And then I'm trying to get to this particular, here's some different choices that we have. Stretch being the default. Center, here's some of our other options. I don't really understand what that means yet, so I'm going to hit play it. And then I get a much nicer visual of my different choices for align items. And so stretch is the default, so if I don't put anything by default, it's going to be stretch. And I'll show you an example of this in a minute in our code over here. Flex start. Interesting. Flex end. Okay, it's putting it at the bottom of the container. You can get the idea, centering it in the parent container. So let's try that on the code that we've created over here. So let me close out all of these screens I have in W3 Schools. And then we're going to go back in here and let's try it. Let's do, in our columns container, let's try, remember it's in the parent. Let's do align items. Let's try our own and just see what it does. Flex and was one of the choices. So what can I, oh, okay, so it's not trying to stretch the content. It's making the content the same, whatever size of the content is the size that the div is trying to make itself. So obviously this content has more, this has less, so it's smaller, and then it's aligning itself to the end. I think there was a text start. Save that and run it. We saw a center. Okay, and perfect, get the idea. And then remember that the default was stretch, which is this here. And so it's trying to stretch it to its container. So each column is stretching it to its container, which is however much space the column's container is taking up. If I didn't put anything in, again, because it's the default, that's why I still showing stretch. So there you go. I'll put it back in just for visual, but you don't have to have it. All right, so that's why it's stretching to the full height of the content. You can change that, obviously, but I'm just kind of honing in on some of the things that make this this work. Let's do this. Let's address that issue where we saw that there was some nice little spacing in between our columns. Well, we've seen ways that we can do that in the past. Each of these are called class columns. So in the past, we've seen that we could probably do like a margin right. Let's say I did 20 pixels. That's pretty big. That sort of gets the idea. So I could do a margin right. And so all of theirs, well, this certainly is right, but now I've got a margin on the end here, which I didn't want. Well, you could, if you so inclined, this is just another way to do it, say columns last child. So the last column child, the last child is showing up in here. We can say, or in other words, this purple column, we could say margin, let's spell it right, margin right 0. We could do that. And so that works, sure. A little bit more work, but nonetheless. There's another way we can do this, however. I'm going to hit Control K just to comment these out for you so it's still on the screen, but I'm not going to utilize them. All right, so now I have no margins. Okay, let's try, I'm going to show you some ideas here. So in the past, let's talk about this. We maybe set up a width of 30%. So we're setting these column widths to 30%. Okay, and remember that 30% means the content, by default, the content itself is 30%. Added to the 30% is another 2 pixels for the border and another 20 pixels for each left and right padding. So the width of this is actually 30% plus padding on both sides. So 40 pixels plus border on both sides to 4. So 44 pixels. So this is 30% plus 44 pixels. That's a lot, right? No, I tried to whistle and it didn't come out. All right, so if we want to change that, we can do, remember that box sizing, border box. And by saying that, what we're suggesting is when we use a width measurement that it's going to include not just the content, but also the padding and the border. And so now this entire space is 30%. Okay. So 30, 60, 90. So here we've got 10% showing. All right. So let's do, why are you showing me all this? Remember, we're trying to make this nice little spacing in between. So another property we're going to look up is one called justify content. And let's see, look for the CSS property, justify content. There it is. And so again, I would encourage you to try these different values. So we've got flex start, flex end, center, interesting. Okay, so the default being flex start. So let's try some of those on our columns. So we're going to, again, we're going to assign that in the container because it's a parent property. We're going to say that all of those columns justify content. Let's try, what was some of them? Flex end. I think that was one of them. Okay. Think one of it's going to the end there. Flex start. Let's see what that does. Okay. All right. I think there was a center. And yeah, okay. But that's not making my margins. So one of those was space between. That looks kind of cool. Let's see what that does. So I'm going to do justify content space between. Save that and now run it. And now we've got those nice little margins in between. So interesting. All right. A better word for width, I'm just going to throw this out. This is more flexboxy, is the word flex basis. And what flex basis, nothing's going to change here because in essence it's doing the same thing. But flex basis is a word in Flexbox language that says this is the basis of which you should start, Mr. Browser. So a starting point, a base point for you is going to be 30%. And then use that 30% as a base measurement, so as you get bigger or smaller, you sort of have a starting reference point. So you can see obviously this isn't 30%. It's trying to decrease itself to make everything fit on that same line. All right, so but remember in our example, we had our columns stack on top of each other when they got, when the screen got smaller. Well, there's different ways to do that, but I just want to kind of demonstrate this idea. We're going to put in a media query kind of to show that we can work with flex boxes and media queries side by side, that they're both tools that we can use for responsiveness, but they're not mutually exclusive of each other. So this is a good point. There's other ways to do this, and we'll do this in the next video, but I'm going to use a media query, and I'm going to say, so and it's good review anyway, at media, remember you can use the word only just to be backwards compatible with older browsers. It's not necessary, but I need the word screen because my point is on the screen. This is for media query for screen display. And parenthesis, I'm going to say min, let's see, max width, because I'm going to make this for a mobile type device like a phone, 380 pixels. And then remember my open and close curly braces, and inside those curly braces are my my styles that are specific to this media viewport size. So let's see, again, a review. What I want to do is I want to have these, right now we call this an inline display. In other words, each of these elements are on the same line or in line with each other. So one of the display properties besides flex that we're doing that you might have seen in other examples is display inline, meaning we use this on navigation a lot too. Display each of these elements side by side as opposed a language problem, as opposed to block, which says each one of these elements goes in its own location. Like block, paragraph, for example, is a block element. Each time you make a new paragraph, it creates a new line, right? So what we're going to do here is if the media, if this viewport is below 380 pixels, then let's display these columns as blocks. In other words, we're kind of overwriting that flex where they're going side by side, and we're going to display them as a block. I guess I have to put, let's see, where those are columns. Columns, I'm going to spell that right too. So columns, C-O-L, this, I don't think spelling 101 was a prerequisite for this class. It should have been for me anyway. Okay, so columns display block. And then what we're also going to do is, probably columns container would be better. We're going to make the parents, that way I don't have to do each individual one. All right, so columns, so within the columns, we also want to make each column 100%. Columns width 100%. So we're kind of overwrite, oops, this should be a semicolon. Not good when you're doing a demo and you keep saying oops. So let me make sure I did this correctly. Let me make it wider so we can see them on the same screen, because for readability it makes more sense. Let's see, this should in fact be within, and columns width. I just did this to show you that, you know, we all make mistakes. Okay, so our columns container is going to have be a display block, and so the columns will therefore inherit the block property. So all of the columns will be blocked, and we're also going to do a display width. So each column is going to be 100%. So it's going to take up the whole width of the container that is being laid out for it. Just let's see if it works. All right, so that looks good. And then when we bring this below, we should see, in fact, that those columns are going on top of each other. So media queries is one way to make that happen. And this was a good demonstration of utilizing media queries. So that would be, we've accomplished what we were going to attack on this video, and on the next one we will accomplish more. I guess that's the whole point of making more videos. All right, see you on the next one.